Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli jets retaliate against Hamas targets in Gaza following yet another round of weekend rockets. United States Middle East peace envoy Jason Greenblatt resigns, and an Israeli app becomes the world's largest social network for cancer patients. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is issuing a stern warning to the Gaza-based Palestinian terror group Hamas this week. Following a weekend of increased terror and violence along the Gaza-Israel border, Netanyahu says that Hamas is responsible for all aggression originating from the Gazan territory, and that any attempts to either harm our civilians or our soldiers will be met with a vigorous response. So what happened? Well, starting on Friday, 2 Palestinian teens were reportedly killed during, quote, especially violent riots along the security fence. The IDF did not comment on these reports, but at least 6,200 Palestinians are said to have taken part in this week's riots. And then just hours later, the IDF identified 5 incoming rockets from the coastal enclave that set off sirens in southern Israeli communities. No injuries were reported, though, while 1 rocket hit an open area outside Sderot, and 2 Israeli women were treated for shock. Then, as per policy, the Israeli army attacked several of Hamas's military targets in the Strip. And later on Saturday, after arresting 3 Gazan teens who crossed into Israel illegally with a knife, Israeli forces reported thwarting an armed drone attack. Hamas militants were flying the UAV armed with explosives over the southern border, dropping ordnance by the security fence before returning to the Strip. And the IDF also says that an IDF military vehicle was lightly damaged in the incident, though no soldiers were hurt. And just as in other attacks, the IDF again fired upon supposed drone operators, as well as on Hamas targets such as naval warfare equipment depots and 2 Hamas aerial system centers. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, 60-year-old Israeli Yosef Perez and his 17-year-old son Liber from Ofakim are in recovery after being stabbed by a 15-year-old Palestinian terrorist. And the pair were attacked Saturday morning while visiting a Palestinian dentist in the village of Azun. And the father, Yosef, was lightly injured in the arm, while his son Liber remains hospitalized with multiple stab wounds to the upper body. Yosef's brother was also present for the attack, but was not hurt.
הגעתי לאזון, טיפול שיניים. נכנסנו, הגיע הדוקר. יותר מזה, אין מה להגיד.
הוא פנה אליכם, הוא ישר...
כלום.
ישר התנפל עליכם?
כן, נכנסנו, פתאום קולטים מישהו מאחורה. שאל אותו, אתם יהודים או ערבים? אחי אמר לו, אנחנו יהודים. אני מסתכל עליו, פתאום אני קולט שיש לו דוקרן ביד. הזכרתי לכם, אמרתי, תיזהר, יש לו דוקרן. עוד לא הספקתי לתפוס לו את היד, כנראה נמצא לי סקירה פה, ביד. ואז הבן שלי פחד עליי, הזיז אותי, קפץ עליו. הילד כנראה קפץ עליו עם הפנים למטה, אז איך אומרים, מצא הזדמנות, התחיל לדקור בו בגב.
But thankfully for the Perezes, their dentist, Dr. Amin, actually came to the rescue. During the returning to the lobby where the attack was underway, Yosef describes to Walla News how Dr. Amin jumped on the attacker and, quote, held him up against the wall to hit him while we escaped. And Amin later asserted to Channel 12 News that inside his clinic, they are all his patients. But as for the assailant, the 15-year-old suspect is thought to have surrendered to Palestinian authorities, while the IDF has arrested his father. And now for more on Israeli security after a weekend of terror attacks, please welcome to the studio Dr. Martin Sherman, founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Dr. Sherman, as always, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me again.
So first of all, this is kind of an unusual incident. How would you kind of look at what occurred just over the weekend in Gaza and in the West Bank?
Well, I saw one news report saying that this didn't generate the usual sympathy for the victims because somehow they were looking for cheap dental treatment in the Arab sector rather than going to a Jewish dentist. But on the other hand,
their Palestinian dentists saved their lives.
That's true. But on the other hand, I don't think there would be much anxiety or concern for the safety of an Arab patient coming to a Jewish dentist. And I think that sort of encapsulates it, the situation completely, because whilst Arabs can walk around more or less without fear in Jewish areas, Jews cannot do that. In fact, they're even sometimes forbidden to go into Palestinian areas because of the fear of attack. But I think this is a little bit. This is sort of not the usual terror attack, and I think the attitude towards it is not the usual outrage that we've seen up to now for the reasons that I just said. Because perhaps the Jews should be more careful in going into these Arab areas, knowing what the reality is there. But getting back to the wider question, the big issue is: do you want to swat mosquitoes and try and thwart every terror attack, or do you want to dry the swamp and make the infrastructure on which that terror is based, if you want to neutralize that infrastructure? Those are two strategies, and Israel apparently hasn't chosen the second.
Well, but looking at this incident, in the West Bank stabbing in particular, wouldn't the argument for getting Palestinians and Israeli Jews together kind of drive the narrative behind this? Like, wouldn't you want more Palestinian doctors or Israeli doctors working with Palestinians and Palestinian doctors working with Israelis? Don't you want more? In a parallel, mingling, I guess?
In a parallel universe, maybe. Because
everybody always says that educating the next generation is the best way to ameliorate the issue.
We know what happened to, I forget his name now, but there was a very active dramatist who tried to promote the Palestinian cause, and he was murdered by Palestinians in the Palestinian territory. The point is there's no naive solution here. And as long as we relate to the Palestinians as a prospective peace partner and not as an implacable enemy, we will never be able to formulate an effective anti-terror policy.
All right, Dr. Sherman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. In other news, in a shocking turn of events, United States Middle East peace envoy Jason Greenblatt has now announced his resignation just weeks ahead of the planned release of the long-awaited American deal of the century. And Avi Berkowitz, one of Jared Kushner's top assistants who's been involved in the formation of the peace plan, will be filling Greenblatt's shoes in just a few weeks' time. While bidding farewell to the American diplomat, Netanyahu says that he'd like to thank Jason Greenblatt for his dedicated work on behalf of security and peace. And Netanyahu also thanks Greenblatt for, quote, not hesitating for a moment to speak out and tell the truth against all those who spoke ill of the state of Israel. Many others, however, see the timing of Greenblatt's sudden departure as a sign of larger problems, primarily with respect to the United States peace plan. Greenblatt, a former lawyer with the Trump Organization, has been working for at least 2.5 years on the deal alongside Trump's advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. So as former peace negotiator Aaron David Miller explains, pulling out perhaps the core member of the team that's negotiating this deal speaks volumes about, quote, the absence of seriousness and credibility behind the plan, end quote. Officially speaking, though, the Orthodox Jewish Greenblatt has reportedly simply decided to return to New Jersey to work in the private sector and be with his wife and 6 children, who throughout the administration have resided in New Jersey. And speaking of the plan, a senior U.S. official under condition of anonymity then claims that at any rate, the plan is done and has the potential to vastly improve the lives of millions of Israelis, Palestinians, and others in the region. On a related note, as the September 17th elections quickly approach, the Israeli cabinet has just unanimously approved a proposed legislation pushed by Prime Minister Netanyahu that would put monitoring cameras in voting booths across the country. And the bill will now be brought before the Knesset for all 3 votes needed to officially become law. Netanyahu explains that the integrity of the elections is one of the pillars of democracy and that this is the best way to prevent fraud, installing cameras and enabling supervision by rival parties. Netanyahu also reiterates that the cameras installed by multiple parties would only view the voting hall and not the booths themselves. So if passed on Monday in the Knesset, the controversial bill would allow rivaling observers from the various political parties to appear at voting stations and supposedly prevent voter fraud. Both the Central Elections Committee and Attorney General Mandelblit warn against the legislation, however, with Mandelblit calling the plan aberrant and flawed. In fact, he says that he's in favor of cameras, but that they need to be installed properly. Whereas now, with so little time to implement the law, Mandelblit says that the expected result is uncertainty, irregularity, deterrence of voters, and problems with managing and voting and registering those votes. That said, though, Mandelblit also explains that for better or worse, there's nothing stopping the Knesset for passing this legislation. Moving on, a special event is being held on Sunday evening in the front courtyard of Tel Aviv's Museum of Art, and it's in honor of the family of Avraham Mengesu, the mentally ill Ethiopian Israeli who wandered into Gaza from the beach at Zikim in September of 2014, and he never returned. Now, it's believed that Mengistu was picked up by the terrorist group Hamas after crossing the border. But Mengistu's brother and mother both spoke with Army Radio before tonight's event, saying that they're disappointed with the Israeli government's lack of effort in bringing Avraham back home. While Prime Minister Netanyahu, for his part, invited Avraham Mengistu's mother, Agarnesh, to a lunch with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was visiting Israel last week. And Agarnesh said that she was looking forward to meeting with Ahmed because she's lost faith in Netanyahu, while Ahmed promised her that he would do his best to get Mengistu home. Agarnesh also said, quote, 5 years on and my son is lost and Netanyahu is doing nothing. Once we loved him like a father, but he's doing nothing. I cry all the time, but there is nothing to be done. Then meanwhile, in addition to Mengistu and the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers, Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul, the Hamas terror group is similarly believed to be holding Hisham al-Sayed, a Bedouin Israeli man. Al-Sayed also crossed the border into Gaza several years ago and is considered to have a mental illness. Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul, on the other hand, were killed during the 2014 Gaza war, and Hamas then took their bodies as bargaining chips. Now, in other news, Israel may soon be finding itself forced into making one of the toughest diplomatic decisions ever, choosing between America and China. Or at least that's how it is according to the United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who earlier this year threatened a decrease in intelligence sharing should Chinese-Israeli relations not be reduced. This doesn't come as much of a surprise, however, as the United States-China trade war balloons further and further out of control. In fact, as of now, recently initiated tariffs are affecting roughly $300 billion worth of goods coming into the States. Moreover, following the investigation into Chinese telecom giant Huawei and their data-sharing policies, security concerns in the United States pushed President Trump to ban the use of international telecom brands within America. And China sees this as a direct and unfair attack, resulting in retaliatory tariffs against American goods as well. But Israel, in the meantime, is caught in the middle, because while Israeli-U.S. relations and trade are paramount to Israel's economy, the Jewish state has only seen a strengthening in ties to their Chinese counterparts too. For example, Israeli consumers have long since turned towards importing Chinese goods to beat the high cost of local stores. And Chinese online retailer AliExpress alone accounted for nearly 50% of all mail shipped into Israel in 2017. Similarly, cutting ties with China would also jeopardize some major development projects within the state, like the $1.4 billion Tel Aviv light rail tunnel construction project and the handing off of the Haifa port to Shanghai International Group, a $2 billion initiative. But at least for now, ahead of elections, it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu will do his best to appease the Chinese while catering more to the states. That's why Netanyahu has already postponed a vote on a new plan that would monitor Chinese investment in Israel, while beefing up restrictions on projects that President Trump has expressed concerns over. And now for more on the United States-China trade war and how Israel falls in the middle, we have Ilan Maor, the managing partner of Sheng BDO. Ilan, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
All right, so first of all, how big of a role does China play in Israel's economy at the moment?
Well, I think it is a growing role in general, and technology, investment, trade, and so on. It's growing fast. We just started relations with China in 1992 when we had $50 million trade between the countries, and now we are above 10 billion. So we've been moved forward, but it's still probably the tip of the iceberg comparing to what can be done.
And so how great of a loss to the economy would that represent if Israel decided to go with America's route and kind of end trade, or at least severely limit trade with China?
Well, I think we're a little bit over-exaggerating it. I don't think the Americans really expect Israel to stop trade with China or to stop all the relationship with China. They start with security and defense issues, and then we agreed with that, and basically there is no military cooperation between Israel and China since 2001, 2002. And now we're talking about economy and business. If we stop the Chinese investors from coming to Israel, if we reduce the volume of trade, it will harm the Israeli economy. There is no question. We are talking about probably one of the biggest economy in the world, soon to be the biggest economy in the world. We are talking about the new world of unlimited opportunities. And giving it up does not make sense.
So then, the big question, will the United States, or rather, how soon will Israel have to choose between China and the United States, and what will that choice look like?
Well, I think we don't have to choose between them. We have been in this type of triangle for the past 20 years. Managing relationship on the one hand with the US, which is our biggest ally,
Sure.
on all aspects, political, military, strategy, and so on, and nurturing the cooperation with China, which is becoming an important ally of Israel. Now, aside of the military aspect, I don't think we have to choose. I think we have to manage the relationship. We have to be careful with what we do. And we have to be careful of letting ourselves being dragged into what is majorly an economic conflict. Sure. It is great that the American president wants his companies to make more money and bring more money to the US. This should not affect our cooperation with China on 90% of the aspects of the economy.
So, okay, so what are the chances, do you think, that the United States and Israel will kind of end this trade war anytime soon?
China and the US. Well, last week they said they're going to meet again in October, hopefully with the vice premier of China going to the US and trying to find a solution to this war. Can it be done? Yes. You have to remember that this is the last year. There have been conflicts and arguments between China and the US for many years. It was managed. It is more difficult to manage it now that it is led by a president who's very impulsive and sits in the White House and makes decisions relatively quickly and not always based on the advisory he's getting from the professionals. It's not what I'm saying. If you listen to what our former governor of the Israeli bank, Stanley Fischer, said last week, he said Trump doesn't understand trade, and what the US is doing now is harmful to the global economy. So I hope logic will take over, and the two countries will sit and deal with the problem. There are major issues that are real. You know, there is a trade balance to deal with, and the Americans are right. It is unbalanced, and the Chinese are willing to balance it better. There are issues that are more into myth, like manipulating the currency exchange. Sure. There have been so many reviews by Americans and others say that this is not a big issue. So if they sit together and talk, I think they can find a solution to most of the problem. Whether they want to do it, both of them, that's the question.
All right, Ilan, Maol, thank you so much for coming in. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, now pregnancy can be both an extremely exciting and extremely worrisome time in a woman's life. And in Israel, where the birth rate is among the highest of the OECD countries, you can imagine that that comes with a lot of concerns from new parents. Well, ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh is here to share 4 new Israeli femtech solutions. Emmanuel, take it away.
So I can't relate to pregnant women's anxiety. I can relate to anxiety in general. And let's just say that if I'm a hypochondriac before I get pregnant, I cannot imagine what I'll be like with a little human inside me. That being said, these new technologies already calm me down, and I'm sure they would calm any woman down, and more importantly, provide at-home solutions and reduce unnecessary hospital visits.
All right, well, that's good, because I can only imagine, how often new parents get nervous and run to the hospital for pretty much every little thing. So let's get started. Tell me about these new technologies.
All right, so the first one is HearBeat by HearMed. This is a smartphone-based fetal heartbeat monitor for home use. Expecting mothers can use this handheld ultrasound device to monitor their fetus's heartbeat and then share that data securely via a smartphone app with their healthcare provider.
Wow, that's amazing. But that alone can probably instantly calm many expecting mothers, from running to the doctor.
Yeah, I wish I had that, honestly.
Oh my gosh, well, that's amazing.
Yes, the next one is pretty similar, but Instinct by Pulse & More. Instinct will be an at-home handheld ultrasound system similar to the other one that actually enables women to record and send images to their doctors so they can evaluate critical parameters such as the fetal's position, cardiac activity, and much more.
Unbelievable. All right, but how much would a system like this cost?
Right, so according to reports, this Instinct ultrasound system would cost no more than $300.
That's actually not bad.
I know.
It's pretty unheard of.
Yeah.
That it would be so, something so unbelievably beneficial would be so cost-effective, I think.
Exactly. And there's more. Lioness by Pregnant Tech, which is trying to find solutions for babies that are born preterm. 1 out of 10 babies worldwide is born preterm. That's 15 million newborns a year, in which 1 million will die and 1 million will suffer from disabilities. Lioness is a disposable silicone ring that is inserted in women and surrounds the uterine cervix. It prevents early shortening and is removed when the pregnancy is safely close to term. They are starting clinical studies this year.
Wow, that's amazing. These are like so unique. I've never even heard of anything like this. All right, last one.
All right, last but obviously not least is Invu, which is a wearable maternal fetal monitoring system that uses central and acoustic sensors. All of these technologies are absolutely revolutionary and undeniably will help the anxiety and concerns surrounding pregnancies.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just getting rid of all that guesswork is just such a huge step beyond where we are. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
On another note, just because something can be Googled doesn't mean Google will give you the right answer. Or at least that's the approach that the creators of Belong have. And Belong is a new app meant for cancer patients who have questions about their condition. But it's more than that too. Belong is also now the world's largest social media platform for cancer patients. Well, CEO Eliran Malki explains that after being diagnosed, more often than not, a patient has many more questions that aren't answered in the office. But the Belong app is all-encompassing, crunching data from 200,000 cancer patients and doctors. So it's a place where you can do some research, keep track of doctor appointments, and get anonymous support from others in the cancer community. This includes 150 oncologists from Sheba, Hadassah, and Rambam medical centers in Israel. And meanwhile, in New York, doctors from Mount Sinai also voluntarily answer questions in the app, as many say that they just can't get to all the questions that patients have in person, but typing them out makes giving answers possible. Best of all, though, the app is working, and it's free for patients while charging hospitals and insurance companies for the service. A study from McGill University in Canada found that 84% of patients in the gynecology-oncology division reported that the app makes them feel less alone. And 80% said that they also feel better prepared for medical consultations, with some patients using the app for up to 90 minutes a month. And finally, the organization operates with 30 employees out of Tel Aviv, and it's currently available in Hebrew, English, and French, with services in Spanish and German on the way. Now finally, the Dead Sea Scrolls have been fascinating archaeologists and history buffs since the 1940s, and a big part of this fascination is just how they were so well preserved. Well, a new study released by researchers of the Journal of Science Advances now gives us an answer. And here with the story is ILTV's Nittany Manson.
Hi, Aaron. Yeah, that's right. So taking a tiny step back, just for those of our viewers who maybe don't know about the Dead Sea Scrolls, since 1947, there have been thousands of pieces of parchment found in the Dead Sea region, and they've all been classified as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, the first of these was actually first found when a Bedouin shepherd had a runaway sheep who ended up in a cave. And when he went looking for the sheep, he actually came across these huge clay jars filled with scrolls.
Wow.
And over the years, archaeologists have found 900 manuscripts and upwards of 50,000 scroll fragments. And the Israel Museum actually even boasts a collection of over 1,000 scrolls.
That's amazing. All right, well, that's what's so exciting about these scrolls is that they are the oldest documented Hebrew writing to ever have been found, correct?
Yeah, and some were even written partially in Aramaic. Aaron, we're talking about scrolls that were written around 2,000 years ago, so it's a big deal.
Okay, so let's get back to this new study then. You know, like what exactly does it tell us about the scrolls?
Well, this study was done on one particular scroll, the Temple Scroll, which stands out because it has a different coloring to it, and it's actually in amazing shape.
All right, so they were looking into why that is, like why it's in such good shape?
Exactly, and they found that it was actually prepared in a different way than the other scrolls. They were all written on animal hide, which was cleaned, thinned, and dried before writing on it, but they found that this one had an extra layer of inorganic material that finished off the process after the writing was done.
All right, and what does that really mean? Like, what are the researchers taking from this find?
Well, basically, it suggests that the scroll was not written in the Dead Sea area. The minerals that were found in the extra layer are similar to ones used by the Babylonians and the Greeks. And these minerals aren't even found in the Dead Sea region. So they're pretty much saying that the scroll was probably written somewhere else and brought over.
Wow, and this opens up probably a whole new line of questions then.
Yeah, I mean, where was it written? Who brought it over? Why? A lot of questions come up here.
All right, well, if there are any updates, I trust that you will be right back with us in the studio. Nittany, thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy and warm with a low of 77 or 25 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow should be more of the same with a high of 86 or 30 degrees Celsius. That's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.52 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.